This is Talking Drupal, a weekly chat about web design and development from a group of guys with one thing in common. We love Drupal. This is episode 276, Becoming a Successful Contractor. Welcome to Talking Drupal. Today we talk with Chad Hester about his advice for becoming a successful contractor. He has hired and worked with contractors throughout his career and now is one. This topic is close to us at Talking Drupal as well. We're looking forward to digging into it. First, let's intro our guest, Chad Hester, returning for the third time now to Talking Drupal. Over 20 years of website development experience. In recent years, worked as a senior solutions architect and a sales engineer at Unleashed Technologies and a CTO of Drupal Connect. Today, he is an enterprise technical consultant and solutions architect for hire. His passions include information architecture, human-centered design, agile development, growth-driven design, and selling open source software solutions. He's an active member of the Drupal and UX communities. And as I said, this is his third time on Talking Drupal, appearing on episodes 192 and 203, both in 2019. Chad, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much. Good to be here.
We will check in with our hosts as we normally do, starting with you, Stephen. What is going on?
Hey, everybody. Yeah, lots going on. I mean, we're at the end of the year. The end of the year and the beginning of the new year is always exciting. Just when the calendar changes, it feels like it's a fresh beginning. So I think we're all looking forward to that coming right down in a couple of weeks. Well, when this airs, it may have just happened. But one of the things that's happened, like we've all been in quarantine or been secluded or whatever you do and been doing more things online, I discovered, or my family discovered, this game called Among Us. Is anyone familiar with that?
Yeah.
They're all like shaking their heads and laughing. So it's an online game, which is kind of like hey, there's like 10 people and 2 people are these killers and you need to, the villagers are against the wolves. That's another game, but it's the same look kind of thing. You got to find who the imposters are and kill them or out them before they kill you. And it's a fun online thing. As a family, we would always play this game called Werewolf when we would have family events. So this is like the online version of that. And we've been playing it almost every night with family and extended family for about 2 weeks now. For 2 hours, sometimes like 5 or 6 hours. It's just been a great way to connect with people, especially with my daughter in Arizona. And she has a lot of downtime. Her semester's over. She's still working, but is away from family during the holidays. So it's just a great way to just connect. So what we do is we get on Zoom and we all connected on a Zoom screen and we play the game online. It's been super, super fun.
Have you tried proximity chat yet?
Have not heard of that. So I need to learn what that is.
So proximity chat is
very similar.
You have to use Discord, not Zoom, but it will detect when you're next to somebody in the game and you can actually talk to them in game, not just during meetings.
Okay.
But you have to be next to them. If you're a little bit further away from them, you can't hear people. So once you start getting, you start to figure out like different people's patterns, it's a good way to change up the game. Cause now you can talk during the game. So you have to pretend during the match verbally as well.
So Nick, throw a link to that in the show notes here so I can take a look at it later.
Oh, I've not actually used it or played it. It's just something.
Okay. Just throw a link though, since you mentioned it, and I can take a look at it.
Yep.
The one thing I will say is that you can play with the public too. And I did that, and it's a crap show. I will never.
I was going to say, I can't
that
imagine
is a bad place to be.
Public.
No, it's not a good place to be. My family and I, we were short a few people to make a good game like a couple of nights ago. So we said, let's make it a public one. We abandoned that decision in about 10 minutes. So don't do it.
That would be
You can create a private group and get together with your families. It's a lot of fun. once you start to invite people from the outside,
I'm curious what made
a
it
good
a
thing.
crap show. Like what?
Yeah, so
people just tell it who the imposters are.
Yeah, but it's not. It's like worse than that. So the first one we created, someone jumped in and says, "Hey, anyone up for a good time? Here's my phone number." And it was like, okay, that's it. We're done with this.
Yeah.
So anyway, so it's a great way to connect with people online.
Awesome. Nick, what's going on with you?
So this week, I actually organized my basement, which if sounds boring, but sometimes it's nice to kind of clear up the clutter. And, as I was doing it, one of the things I was thinking of is it's similar to how similar it is to like website organization. You're trying to classify different objects and things and put them in, put them in similar places. There's some things that don't really fit in a specific place. You want things that are accessed commonly, easily accessible, and things, sometimes there's something that's important that's not really accessed very often. So, I was trying to make a little bit of room. So I got a couple more shelving units, and, just spent a few hours just kind of cleaning up and tidying up. And just, sometimes it's nice to do something that's not super, mentally taxing, just moving things around, shifting around. But, one of the things that kind of stood out too is, just like web organization is also, collaborative, and people have different opinions. Cause, I did this myself. My wife was working on some other projects. And, once I finished her showing around, she came in and immediately moved a few things around. Had a different opinion on organization, but it's sometimes it's nice to just clean up and have some space.
It's interesting. I can't agree with that more, seeing as right now my basement is an absolute disaster. We're building a craft room / office for my wife in the basement. So like there's a portion of the basement that is like doesn't have anything in it, and that stuff is just strewn about the rest of it. So
John, you're doing some wiring down there, right? Recently.
I was, yeah. We added some electrical outlets, so I was doing some wiring, and it was fun. It was it was a thing that people do. Put in insulation the other night. Yeah, all sorts of fun things happening in my basement right now. Chad, what's going on with you?
Oh God, all over the place. It's been a very busy past few months. I think obviously people start to get a little introspective about what they want to do with their time when they're stuck inside all the time. So my wife's a really good cook. I've been trying to cook myself just to, keep the hands busy. Around here in Maryland, there is so much good meat and produce that's fresh and local. So a lot of the stuff that we would have normally bought at the grocery store, we've just completely cut off. We don't even go to the grocery store anymore. Yep. So there's that.
Cool. And you're a bit of a mixologist, right?
Yeah, I do a lot of cocktails. I mean, it started with beer, and then I got into whiskey. And then once you accumulate a lot of liquor, you find things to do with that liquor other than just drink it straight.
And there's nothing better to your wife's very lucky to be, sequestered with you, because, in a pandemic, a mixologist is a great thing to have in the house. Just saying, from my perspective, anyway.
She doesn't complain, and I don't complain about her cooking, so it's pretty good.
Go.
Our entire house smells like bacon right now because she made a bacon and potato soup last night.
That sounds fabulous. I think good. Everything's better with bacon. So,
hey, John, by the way, I'm not so sure alcohol's been one of the best things during the pandemic for the country at large.
You know what? I would tend to agree with you on that, but I personally have, think that alcohol consumption is obviously up, and I would appreciate being on lockdown with a mixologist, because
so if you're gonna do it right.
My old fashioned is not as good as some that I've had. So
I'll give you a recipe. Start off with a 1/4 ounce of maple syrup. Add an ounce of rum, an ounce of whiskey, and then toss that in to a tumbler with a big fat ice cube. Toss in some bitters if you have that. Stir it until you can't stir it anymore, and then drink that. That's a special kind of seasonal old fashioned.
Interesting. I'm gonna have to try that. Typically, I go with Luxardo cherries because as opposed to like sugar or maple syrup's a good idea. I'm gonna have to check that out later. So as far as for me, a couple of things. Last show, I gave an update on my Wemo. The drama saga continues. I updated. There was a firmware update for my Wemo. So I went into the app and I hit the update button, and that was like 2 days ago, and they're still updating apparently, but they still work in HomeKit just fine. So Wemo, if you're listening, you sent me a, hey, how would you recommend Wemo to your family? Which I clearly said, no, I wouldn't, not right now. Anyway, I digress there. The other thing that's been really fun is I think on a couple shows ago, I mentioned the Queen's Gambit on Netflix, watching that and then getting back into chess. And happy to say that I have a few more games going now because Stephen and Nick and I have all started playing chess. And they're now keenly aware of how terrible I am. And I don't know. It's been fun. So I look forward to continuing that.
Yeah, chess has been fun. It's been fun to get back into that. The chess.com app is pretty slick, pretty easy to use. Although I did try to restart that game after our first game, and I think you actually had to restart it. So maybe there are some interface bugs, but
it's interesting because it's a little crazy doing 3 games at once because you're getting emails like all the time, like all day yesterday. I was getting emails like, it's your move, it's your move, it's your move.
Which game is this?
I was like, I'm like, well, that was part of the problem. I'm like, what am I trying to do in this game? Oh, right. Oh, I just messed up. Okay. Anyway, let's jump into our topic. It's a big one, and we want to get into it. So we're talking about becoming a successful contractor. Now, we've all at one time or another worked with contractors, been a contractor. And, in this show, we're going to kind of dive into some of that experience and how to become successful at being a contractor, if that's your decided path. So I want to start off by just going through our panel here and talking about experiences as a contractor, and we'll start with Chad first. Why don't we go that way?
Sure. Well, actually, I started my career as a contractor. It was a contract with a staffing agency, working directly with them, building a payroll system. That contract ended. I went back to school, and fast forward maybe about 10, 15 years later, I got right back into contracting. In that case, I started an LLC. My wife actually was an employee of mine. So I got that side of the experience, which was kind of interesting. Did that for a couple of years and then got hired, and here I am again contracting. It's kind of a love of being free sometimes.
So, Stephen, what about you?
I've been, I guess you would call it a contractor since 1996. So I worked for a number of years as employee for a number of companies, and then went on my own in 1996. So John, I can see he's trying to do the math.
I already did it. It's 14 years.
14.
14.
Oh, wait,
Your math
no.
is terrible.
Sorry, my math is terrible. It's definitely 34?
24. 24.
Thank you.
24.
Thank you.
Yeah, another decade. Yeah. So
I've been on vacation this week, so
there you go. That explains why you're playing chess all day.
A lot of time.
Yeah, so 24 years of experience from like just a solo person to a more of a company structure with 11 employees at one point, and now sort of back to more of a solopreneur now.
And those have been in those contracts have been in different industries, different.
Oh yeah, it's been all over the place in 24 years. Yeah.
So a lot of experience there, right?
Yeah.
So we have, Chad and Stephen have a lot of experience. I will say that my experience with contracting has been more on the working with contractors side, less on the actual contracting side. Early on in my career, I did do some contracting. I think my second job out of college was a contract position, and then turned into a hired position. But yeah, we work with contractors at OOMF frequently, and we have various criteria and various contractors that we work with. Nick, what about you?
Yeah, John, so I think you're bringing good perspective to this conversation today, because
I hope so.
Yeah, because a lot of contractors work with agencies like yours, and it's good to have some insight into what you look for and what you think is valuable in a contractor.
Yeah, absolutely. Nick, what about you?
Yeah, I've been contracting now or freelancing or whatever you want to call it for 12 years. So, I mean, it's been a long time, about half of what Steven's been doing. I also have been in a couple, most of that's been web work, but in the beginning, I first started out right after college, and web work couldn't sustain living expenses even at post-college levels. So I actually also did some landscaping. I don't know if you guys knew that. I did some landscape architecture and design, and
Did not know that.
general landscaping for a couple of people. So did that. Yeah, I did that for maybe the first 2 years.
And you continue to do that.
Yeah, I do that. I mean, that's where the experience for building patios and different types of gardens and things. I definitely credit that.
We have to put out there that Nick is no longer a landscaping contractor. We don't want anybody emailing him about pergolas.
Well,
and whatnot.
for the right price,
I was going to say, there's always a rate.
No, fair enough. Yeah. So let me ask the opposite side of that question, Nick. Are you going to do any home automation contracting anytime soon?
I've been thinking about it. Yeah, I've been thinking about it. There's a lot of problems with it. It's very tough to support, kind of the current, if you're not working with
issue.
Control, unless you're working for a company like Control 4 or Savant, those giant corporation installs, it's really difficult to support a home automation system. I don't want to be supporting Wemos that won't update 4 years from now. So it's tough.
So let's move on to real general, sort of a general discussion of benefits and challenges that we've seen with contracting. I'm kind of interested in personal experiences of, if someone said to you, hey, what are the benefits of contracting? What would you say they are to you? Let's start with Nick. You, Nick.
I mean, there's a lot of benefits. I think the biggest one for me, and it's different for different people, but for me, I think it's the ability to have more input into what kinds of projects I'm working on than I think. Then again, I haven't really worked for somebody in so long. I don't know how true some of these statements are, but for me, it's the freedom. Internally, if a client is problematic, I can move away from that client and work on other relationships. Or if a technology is not working for me, then I can stop using it. Or if I want to learn a new technology, and start working there, that's a decision I get to make. It's not, sometimes it's hard to work on new technologies for companies. If a company only works with Drupal or WordPress, for example, it might be difficult to find something in Python or React. So for me, one of the big things is that freedom, the ability to make that choice.
How about you, Chad?
Yeah, I'd agree with that. That was part of the impetus for me moving in that direction is kind of exploring things a little bit. I'm not necessarily against becoming an employee again, that type of thing, but I couldn't agree more with Nick. It's that idea that I have control. If I want to go have coffee this morning, nobody's here to stop me. If I want to take a week off, I don't have to ask permission. I mean, there's a lot of nuance to that, but of course there's sacrifices that you make for that freedom.
Yep.
Yeah, I'm interested to hearing more about you would become an employee again. And I think we've got a note for that later in the show notes.
Yep.
So we can chat about that a little bit. For me, I would have to say freedom is the key, which I think you both have already said. It's flexibility and freedom. The opposite of that is some of the challenges we'll talk about in a minute. But John, for you, from your perspective, what are the benefits of bringing on contractors?
I think it comes down to a couple of different things, and I think the biggest one is skill diversity, right? So like you can go out and get a contractor that doesn't necessarily that does have a certain skill set that your team may not necessarily have. Also, what you guys are all talking about, you're all talking about flexibility. When you're working with a contractor, usually you can say, here's what needs to be done. Here's when it needs to be done by. And then they have the flexibility to go and do that task. And, they might be, working at night. They might be working, off hours from what you're working, depending on where they are in the world. So there's a lot of flexibility there. We're going to talk about further down what are good things and bad things about contractors and how to be a good successful contractor. But yeah, I mean, I think it's the flexibility that a contractor brings, and the fact that a contractor can add to your talent pool by bringing in skills that your team might not have.
All right, so Nick, let's take the opposite coin now. Nick, like, what stands out to you as one of the bigger challenges in your life as being a contractor?
I mean, there certainly are challenges. I think I don't want to go down this route too much, but one of the big ones is always healthcare. Being in America, that's an enormous expense. And on the flip side, being sick is also a somewhat bigger problem when you don't have, paid sick days or paid holidays that you can dip into. If you're a freelancer, you don't have other people that can easily pick up that slack. On the actual contracting side, I think the two biggest challenges are, one is until you build that relationship, you're an outsider to an organization. So sometimes there's a lot of barriers to, even just access for a project. Like, you're getting hired by a new company, like you need to get credentials for certain things. Sometimes you need to get introduced. You're not just an employee. Many times you don't have an email address that's equal. Like, you just have to, you're outside. So sometimes you have to figure out how to make sure you can build those relationships. And then I just briefly, the third challenge that I run into is, while I enjoy lots of these aspects, you very much have to run the whole business. You are HR, you are the accountant, you are the security person, you are the web developer, you are, you have to do everything in the business for it to run. Otherwise it, just doesn't get done. While, all that while maintaining whatever service you're providing to your customers.
Yeah, I think we're going to tap into a lot of the things you just mentioned today as well. So how about you, Chad? Biggest challenges?
Yeah, there's a whole lot. I think when you're a contractor, it's kind of hit or miss. You want to keep your pipeline full. So the work that you have today is not guaranteed when it's done. So if the relationship goes well, then hopefully that could develop into something more extensive, and you want to nurture those relationships. But you have to know what's next. You have to market yourself, have a good portfolio, have good references, have a resume ready to go. Because oftentimes, if you're a contractor working with a larger company, they're also selling you to somebody else. So I think there are obviously other challenges of running a business and things of that we'll get into. But I think that's the part that a lot of people may forget is you're selling yourself, you're marketing yourself, and you have to have some of those skills.
Yeah, for me, I echo you guys again. I think the biggest challenge for me has been running a business, as opposed to doing what I really like to do, is the tech stuff. So they're kind of like two opposite ends of the spectrum in terms of skills and where your attention is. And you have to pay a lot of attention to maybe something that you're not interested in but it's critical for your survival. So it's an interesting thing. And I think I've failed a lot. I've had some great successes on the business side. I also had some great failures. So
I will say
that's been the biggest challenge. John, what about on your end?
I will say that's one of the larger reasons why I realized very early on that contracting wasn't necessarily for me, because I very much wanted to focus on building the solution as opposed to finding the business or running the business or any of that. So I think, part of the, what you guys are calling out as challenges to me were kind of like, I don't want to have to think about those things. So I'm going to go find a job where I don't have to. But on the flip side, there are a bunch of people out there that want to become contractors. And, I think part of this show is figuring out how they can do that. So diving into that a little bit more, Chad, I want you to start off here. How can we dive into becoming a successful contractor? What do we need to do?
Yeah, there's a lot. So I think it's one of those things where if you're going to consider that, you need to just picture that this is not something that's going to happen this week. And if it is, you're really, really rushing it. So I think just putting on like the career counselor hat, I'd like to say that I've worked in this industry enough to probably learned a thing or two, and I'm still learning. But because I'm a researcher, I like to ask questions, and I like to be prepared for there to be several answers and several things that are personal. So the first is when I was about to do a job switch, this was a couple months ago, I just sat down and said, what questions help me explore that? And I had input from other people, and I asked these questions to some of my peers to figure out what they would say about me, and see if there's trends from that. So I have a few questions. I'm just going to throw them out rapid fire, and there's a Trello board that we can put in the show notes if you want that has this in there.
So Chad, this Trello board will be in the show notes.
Okay.
And this is such a great way to like have people like work on things later. Like after they listen to the show, jump on that Trello board and you can like just brainstorm and think about and explore this journey for yourselves. We need to do this more often in this show, by the way, is create these kind of like Trello boards to the question and answer. This is a great idea.
Yeah. Thanks. It's good research tools. And I think it's that tactile, visceral exercise that kind of gets you to explore things, prioritize things, take a step back, look at what your answers were, and maybe compare that to what other people may say to the same questions about you and see if there's a trend. But just rapid fire, what do you want to produce and what impact will you have? For me, it was things like healthcare, education. Those sort of industries really are areas where I want to make a difference. Am I making that difference? Another question is, what am I good at and how do I add the most value? So if you're going to sell yourself, you need to know where you're valuable and really cue that up in your conversation. So that's an important question. But also, what brings you joy? There's going to be overlap between those two, because why'd you get into this industry in the first place? Probably because you're interested in it. But there's some non-work related stuff too. If I liked brewing beer, then I want to make time for that in my life. That might bring me joy. So how do I shape my job life around that? What do I want to avoid? The biggest thing for me that stood out as I got into this was the commute. I was driving at least 30 minutes one way, but sometimes an hour and a half at times. Right. And I just started to realize that wore me down quite a bit. What lifestyles do you like? Do you like to travel? Do you like to buy expensive things? Are you kind of more of a homebody? What is it for you? Where can you grow? Looking forward into the future, how can your next steps help educate you and shape your career and the other things that you want to do in your life? And then lastly, kind of in the same vein, is what are you doing in 5 years? Just a hypothetical.
And do those questions, I mean, starting to be, the path of a contractor, right? You have this last question here. What am I doing in 5 years? Like, is that like, hey, a pathway to like, oh, I'm starting my own company? Or is it like, hey, in 5 years, I want to be contracting for, this company or that company, or I want to be contracting in this industry or that industry?
Yeah.
The great thing about that question, what am I doing in 5 years, is not about what the answer is. It's more about that you're asking yourself that question.
Mhm.
And when you ask yourself that question on a regular basis, it kind of helps define maybe decisions you make along that path, right?
Mhm.
We would all love to be something in 5 years. Or a lot of people never ask themselves that question, is where do you want to be in 5 years? When you take a moment to think about it, it does change the decisions you make and the path you take to maybe get there. And that 5-year decision could change every 6 months. But if you ask the question, you at least have a path that you're on.
Mhm.
Yeah.
That plays against 2 of the habits from the 7 Habits book. Begin with the end in mind, and first things first.
Yeah. It's like
making that
wayfinding, right? Like, okay, where do I want to be in 5 years? Okay, I'm working towards that goal. Okay. 3 months, 6 months, a year later, where am I want to be in 5 years? Okay, I'm working. I'm still working towards that goal, and the goal hasn't changed.
And it's okay if curveballs come your way. This year we experienced a massive curveball, and I think that changed a lot of people's outlook on what it is that their future might be. And that's okay. That we need to be organic. It doesn't need to be this scripted life.
It also, would you say that it changed contracting a little bit as well? Because, now people are okay with the remote aspect. There aren't like in-person contractors or anything like that.
Yeah, I like to refer to the pandemic as a force function. It kind of forced us to have to experience something. But yeah, there's a 36% increase in freelance contracting this year in the United States alone.
So pivoting from that a little bit and focusing still on, becoming a contractor, what type of person should become a contractor? And I have my own thoughts about this from like the agency side, but I want to hear what you guys think. Is it a person that works really well independently, on a task for long periods of time, or is it somebody that, is more of a team player, needs more social interaction? What do you guys think?
I think that's an important part of this and it's not that I think as a contractor myself, I do work a lot independently, and I'm pretty much 100% remote pre-COVID as well. But I don't think you have to be that to be a contractor, right? Because working independently, means like kind of working alone and providing services. It doesn't mean that you can't work with a team that is remote and produce and do things. I think you need to understand that about yourself, though, to be successful when you do this. Like if you're a better team member, you need to find work where you're working with a team and not independently producing results. And I think that is a struggle, or it was for me. It was for me when I moved from being an employee to working independently. And over the years, I've worked on really tight group teams, and then I've worked independently. I know as a person, I'm way better in a group environment than an independent environment. So I try to find those experiences for me when I'm at least connected with a team of people. That's where I thrive better. Like completely working independent and producing something is not the best place for me. Not that I can't do it, it's that I don't enjoy it as much. I really like collaborating with people. So understanding those things about yourself, I think, is helpful when you're deciding to be a contractor and choosing the kinds of jobs you work on.
Go ahead, Nick.
Yeah, generally, I mean, there's no like one size fits all. Like you can be an introvert and be a successful freelancer. You can be an extrovert and be a successful freelancer. But there are a few things I think that are kind of key. I mean, whether you work with a group or independently, you do need to be a self-starter. because whether or not it's directly related to your product, there will be certain things that you do need to get done that nobody's going to tell you this needs to be done. So that's definitely, I would say that's one thing. You do need to have some sort of self-discipline, because, if you don't, then it'll be very hard to get your business off the ground. Now, that's not to say, one thing that I will say, people starting out freelancing for the first time, or maybe even getting back to it, maybe Chad, you can speak to that. When you go from being an employee, being in person, or having like a time clock to punch in, to being freelance, the first few months are going to be rough. You're going to be, you'll probably, start
First
later
few
than
months?
you. Yeah, I'd say maybe 6 months to a year, maybe.
All right.
But you're going to start later. You're going to work later. You're not, you're going to, stuff will fall off your plate. You're not going to really keep track of everything that you needed to keep track of, because some of the things you didn't realize you needed to keep track of. And that's fine, but eventually you do need to settle down into a routine. You do need to keep track of the things you need to keep track of: quarterly taxes, yearly renewals of things, things like that. There's just a lot to keep track of.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Chad,
So,
do you have anything to add there?
Yeah, I think I'm looking at it right in front of me. I have a sheet of paper that says daily drills. Part of that is, what am I doing at the very beginning of the day? Usually I'm, checking my communication channels, prioritizing what I need to focus on, adding things to my calendar to block things off. So that way, if people need to schedule around those sort of things, they can see that. I think the whole topic of scheduling and calendaring is a discussion in of itself. There are tools for that, but it is always a challenge. But also the daily closeout, that we always talk about work-life balance. And I agree, Nick. Discipline is the utmost importance here. It's very easy to lose sight of that and slip your schedule. But I don't have kids, but I do have a spouse, and I like spending time with her and disconnecting from work. So one of the things that I've been doing for a couple of years now is I'll just log my time. As soon as that time's logged, I am off work. It is this hard cut off, which means that if I know that point in my day is looming, I need to get that start early, so that way I can get enough hours logged and pay my bills. If I don't get enough time in a week, I'm not going to be able to, live in the budget that I've set for myself. So I think being disciplined, not only in your practice during the day, but also your financial existence, is really important as well.
So I got a couple more questions here. And one thing I wanted to circle back on was the working independently, or being an independent worker. I think from an agency standpoint, being an independent individual is good. I think, we personally, I think, prefer somebody it's more familiar and more comfortable with a team atmosphere. But I think overall, depending on what type, you kind of have to be a little bit of both, right? You have to be able to work with a team. You have to be able to be off independent, doing your own thing. But the key there is communication. I think every time we work with a contractor, we're looking for really good communication skills. Almost over communicating is better in some instances, especially working with a contractor. I think you have to keep in mind from, a client or an agency standpoint, when they're hiring a contractor, they may not necessarily know that person unless they've worked on other projects. So I think, that communication is definitely important. One thing I wanted to ask specifically about for you guys as contractors, is just really quickly the kind of things you get with a company job, right? So you have health insurance, you have retirement savings, you have like paid time off. Also, if you get sick, you have sick time, that sort of thing. How are you guys planning for that? Is that just something that comes along with running the business, or is it a concern?
I mean, those kinds of things are an enormous concern as a contractor. I'll just very quickly say, health insurance, in America, you have to have it. You will if you have a big health event, you don't have health insurance, you will go bankrupt. You might go bankrupt even with health insurance, but you will go bankrupt without it. A lot of contractors, their spouse will have health insurance. And that's one way. Retirement, when you're first starting out, that's really hard, but it's definitely something you need to consider. Like I have, you can look into Roths, you can look into SEPs, money market accounts. You definitely need to do that. Time off, personally, that's the hardest one for me because, you're not paid. So you're usually getting checks. If you take a week vacation, you're still getting checks from previous work, but then 2 or 3 weeks later, or a month later, or 45 days later, you're now going to have a week where nothing comes in. So things like business trips, DrupalCons, those kinds of things are a much bigger investment as a freelancer, because not only are you paying for, in non-COVID times, travel, tickets, things like that, you're also not getting paid during those trips. But yeah, those are all huge concerns.
And Nick, you said it earlier, getting sick is the unexpected time off work. So I think there are things like AFLAC even for self-employed people. Just being aware of what those things are above and beyond health insurance, retirement, of course, like you said, is really important, but also just savings in general. So that way, when you do take time off, you can still afford the lifestyle that you've chosen for yourself. One thing that my wife and I decided to do getting into this, being a little bit more financially responsible, is tighten the belt. We recently pay for DirecTV because we get Sunday Ticket because we're Pats fans down here in Baltimore. And I don't know if you know this, but Sunday Ticket's extremely expensive. So it's just looking at the biggest factors in your bills and just start slashing those things away. Do I really need this to enjoy my life? So I think that kind of helped, is like trimming the fat, figuring out what makes sense. But my wife and I, we have a vacation. I haven't taken a vacation all year at all. So we finally put our foot down and said, you know what, we're going to take some time off, even though we're contractors. So we're going to go to West Virginia, cabin in the woods, completely isolated from everybody. We specifically looked for places with hot tubs and dove into it that way. But we have to be aware that we're not going to get paid during that time, or we choose to work in a trickle while we're away, if that's what we choose.
So you basically, as a contractor, you lose 6 days, federal holidays, and vacation. So you need to figure that into the number of billable hours that you're going to have per year. Figure in how many hours you need to work a year and get billed for it, because none of those things you're going to get paid for moving forward.
Well, it depends on the type of contracting, because I get paid for those days because I work those days. But other contractors like Steve, so that's the other thing.
Wait a minute. You said you got paid for those days because you work on those days.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. There's different types. There's different types of contracting.
He's coding websites while he's open Christmas presents.
No, not at Christmas.
No,
obviously.
Nick. The point is, you only get paid when you work.
Exactly.
Right. So you don't get paid for those days. You don't get paid for holidays.
Yeah, those holidays don't exist for me.
Right. That was what I said.
Sorry. Yeah, that was that. Okay. I think we're making the same point from different angles. But the next thing that we want to talk about, and I don't think we need to spend a whole lot of time on this part because it's fairly technical. We're not lawyers, but you do need to consider how you're going to structure your business. If you're going to be a freelancer, there are many different ways you can structure your business legally. Those are going to depend on state, local, federal, or country laws. But you definitely want to, especially if you are married, you have kids, you have a house, you have property, you definitely want to, at the minimum, have some sort of LLC. But there's all sorts of, you could have a nonprofit, you could have an S corp. There's a lot of different ways you could structure your business.
I think that's somewhat predicated on whether or not you have a relationship with somebody else, like employees.
Right.
Yeah. I think that's one of the biggest determining factors. Whether or not you have partners or employees, or you're subcontracting as well.
Another point another point to think about is when you're structuring your business legally is there's lots of opportunities out there for businesses that are minority or women owned. So as you structure your business, consider that if you have a spouse or a partner that could be a 51% ownership of your business and then end up qualifying for some of those benefits you could get in the US. I know it's important with government work, and it could be outside of that you get some benefits if you fall into that category. So explore that.
I think one note here is you know, as Nick said, we're not lawyers or accountants, but you should get a lawyer and an accountant, because I think the biggest deterrent for me when looking at like contract work is that small period in time where I did that contract work. Like clearly I knew that they were not taking taxes out of my paycheck, but come the end of the year when I sat down with my accountant, I was like, oh, cool. Here's all this money that I now owe to the government. So making sure that you're talking to a tax professional and kind of factoring in those taxes so you don't get.
Yeah. If you're a freelancer, be prepared to not have a tax return. You will be paying taxes.
Yes.
If you're having good years.
You don't get money back anymore.
Yeah. I haven't.
But a good CPA makes a big difference. My wife and I have had a CPA since we started doing anything freelance, and it's saved our butts quite a bit. But you know, obviously, if your CPA isn't doing a good job, find a better one. But you know, even just keeping tabs on things like your invoicing, your expenses. Health insurance is non-taxable, so you do get a lot of write-offs. And working with a CPA can help explore what that actually looks like from every nuance.
And then in the last 3 or 4 years, these tax laws have changed quite a bit in terms of a small business and what you can and can't write off. So having someone involved that is up on that stuff is really important.
That goes even if you're not a contractor.
It's true. Yeah, I guess it is true. So let's move on to how do you find work and how do you find employees? So the biggest challenge, like when someone is thinking about, hey, I'm going to go on my own, I'm not going to be an employee anymore. Now I need to find my own customers. I need to find my own jobs. So there's lots of things to consider, and there's things you can do to help that out. So let's talk about some of those.
I can tell you the biggest thing that's helped me throughout my entire career, regardless of whether or not I'm contracting, but especially when I'm contracting, is networking. Reaching out, developing relationships, and especially in this Drupal community, it is a small community. If you build a reputation, that can go a long way. And if you completely soil that reputation, that can really kill your chances of getting rehired in any sort of relationship. There are some organizations that can help you with contracting, whether they're staffing agencies, headhunters, specifically Drupal agencies I personally love working with because they've already done the selling for the work, and I can help them with the selling for the work too as a contractor. Right. That idea of leveraging those sort of resources, I think, really helps.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, networking is key. But I would say one of the things that's helped me the most is remembering to evaluate networking. In the beginning, there were just a lot of networking things that I did just because I knew you needed to network. But I remember at one point, right around when I got married, I kind of like stepped back and took a long, hard look at all the different avenues I was networking and realized there were some that, you know, there were some groups I was paying money to be part of and investing an enormous amount of time to be part of and getting nowhere near anything worth that investment. You know, I was spending 10 to 15 hours a week interacting with these groups and, you know, maybe getting 4 hours worth of work a month out of it. And it just took me forever to realize that. So networking is key, but it's also important to look for new avenues to network and evaluate those channels at some point. It's also important, you know, if your pipeline's full, to still keep a tab on that because, you know, your pipeline can dry up at some point. You don't want to have your pipeline dry up and then be like, oh, I have no work. I better start networking now. You know, you want to have those resources to pull on, you know, if you have contracts ending or projects ending.
I'm curious a little bit about direct work to clients or through agencies, and what you guys think about that, and maybe what your percentage is, if you can share it. I, for years, did direct work for clients, never did agency work. Now I'm 100% going through an agency. So I've moved between those two things over the years. Do you guys have any thoughts about direct versus agency work?
I've done
Go ahead, Chad.
Yeah, I've done both. I personally prefer agency work just because it's kind of a buffer. It kind of takes some of that burden off of your plate, which impacts your rates. I mean, if you're going to price yourself out, you need to think about how much time during the week are you spending selling your wares.
So the burden being the marketing side.
Yeah, it definitely lightens that quite a bit. I mean, you still have to market yourself to an agency or multiple agencies if that's the avenue that you go down. And some people mix between agency and direct.
Yeah, I mean, I do both. I think agencies, Chad kind of hit the nail on the head with one of the advantages is that, and once you get your foot in the door, you're focusing on one relationship or a couple, relationships with one agency, multiple PMs usually, and other developers. But even if one project goes away, if you show your expertise and you're reasonably priced and you know your stuff, then you don't have to sell to them again. When they have a project that is a good fit, they'll come back to you.
So the agency is working for you. If you've done your job as being a good contractor, the agency ends up working for you in terms of finding new business.
Yeah.
Then direct work, though, I think is important too, because one of the things that the direct work does that agency work almost never does is direct work. You're doing the whole project end to end. So in Drupal, that means, there might be pieces of Drupal that you don't interact with a lot, or there might be something that you have to solve. It forces you to broaden your horizons. Whereas when you're working with an agency, many times the agency is having you work on a specific task. You can get pigeonholed if you're just working for agencies, which as a freelancer is a risk. I think, you definitely, we'll talk about this a bit more later, but you definitely want to specialize, but you don't want to be pigeonholed. You don't want to be, the guy that is known as only being able to do X, because that really reduces your pool.
I did want to mention this is kind of dancing around a fundamental sales principle, though, the funnel. This idea that you're accumulating leads, you're qualifying those leads, and then you're closing sales. And it's usually 10%, 10%. So out of 100 possible leads that you might have, whether it's through networking or other channels, you might only get 10 that are good, if you even pay attention to qualifying those leads. And then after you get those 10, like, you may not have time to even service all 10. Which one do you want to pick from once you qualify them? Which ones are more priced accordingly and kind of fit your schedule? So I think that applies to contracting just as much as it does to larger companies.
It does. I also want to two things I want to mention. One is time. The longer you're in, it's tough at the beginning, but the longer you do contracting, the more relationships you have and the easier it is to get more work. Nick, would you agree with that? Being in this for 10 years or so plus, is that the longer you're in this, the more connections you have. And what was very difficult maybe 10 years ago to get a new contract when one ends is a little bit easier as time goes on.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, as you build those relationships, even if the person moves on to a new company, that's now an opportunity. I mean, that's why, especially as a freelancer, I think in life this is good advice, but as a freelancer, it's especially good advice. You never want to burn bridges.
Yeah.
But because you never know where somebody's going to end up. You never know where you're going to end up. And if you can help somebody, look right on a project in a new company, that can be, a new avenue for the both of you. So yeah, as you gain experience, as people, percolate through different organizations, yeah, it's definitely easier to pick up work.
I've often seen that like picking projects, for me, there's always been a great mix of finding long-term projects and short-term and mixing them together. Like to come up with a formula for yourself of, I've got steady income, and then I also have these projects that come in and out.
Yeah, that's something that's really important for me as well. I mean, for two reasons. One is, if you get blocked on a long-term project, you have something you can switch to. Or if you have a long-term project and you're just bored with something that you've been working on for a couple of days, sometimes it's helpful for you and your client to take a break. You know, if you work on a project for somebody else, it's a completely different space. You know, you can kind of mentally reset, come back to the issue you were working on, you know, with a fresh set of eyes, and you can get it, you know, you can get past that block and get it done. So, you know, from that perspective, it's I think for me, it's mentally healthy to have a mix of projects, because if I was doing the same thing day after day, just one project, you know, I would struggle to complete that. The other reason is long-term projects end, and having short-term projects to bridge that gap can be really helpful. You know, you don't want to go a long time without work, but you also don't want to have a bunch of long-term projects going at once, because
Right.
that can be difficult too.
Hey, Chad, have you had the opportunity to do a retainer kind of project where, hey, someone wants 10, 15 hours from you a week for the next year or 6 months, and then you balance your other work outside of that?
I've sold those. I haven't done it as a contractor. It is a thought that's crossed my mind quite a bit, and if I continue down this path, it is a strong consideration is doing that sort of thing. But it kind of, I'm not sure if it's as compatible with working with an agency. Direct, I could definitely see that working a lot more lucratively, though.
I do that, but I generally try to do that with existing relationships, where if somebody says, hey, we have this thing that we need you to take care of, we don't know exactly when, we think it's going to be this bucket of hours, I prefer to do that there, because, you know, at that point, I know that work's going to come back. One of the problems with retainers, you know, obviously the contract's more complicated, but, you know, if you have somebody relatively new and they give you 10 hours of stuff and then never give you the work or never call on you, it can get messy. I mean, even if the legal side of it isn't messy, just the relationship part of it can get messy. So I try to avoid retainers with people that I haven't worked with on at least a couple of projects in the past. Even if it's not a long-term project, if I've worked a couple of projects with the people and I know them, then I would certainly consider a retainer. But in general, I try to avoid them.
Okay. Top tip for marketing yourself. Chad, you first.
Yeah, I keep going back to the relationships, you know, developing good relationships. To me, it's the intangible. It's not so much the direct, oh, this is going to give me work tomorrow. It's more a matter of these are relationships that I've fostered for years, and sometimes they turn out, sometimes they don't. Yeah, you've got your leads, but definitely relationships.
Nick, do you have one?
Yeah, I think build your expertise. So like I said, you don't want to be pigeonholed, but building your expertise and letting people know what that
This is marketing
is.
So how do you market that though? Build your expertise you can do in your room by yourself. The question is how do you market that expertise?
Host a podcast.
There you go. That's a great tip. How about John?
I'm going to kind of go with Nick there. I think,
okay.
Talking at camps, getting out and presenting in front of people is a great way to promote your expertise. I also agree with Chad. It's a relationship, and it's not always like, hey, I meet you and now we're going to do business. It's a long game.
Yeah.
Play the long game.
How about you, Steven?
I would say both. Yeah, I agree. I mean, just get into the community, whatever that means. It might not mean going to camps, but whatever that means to you in terms of getting into the community of people that you're trying to work with, get in there and get involved. So how about finding work? Like practical tips. How do you find a job that's available?
Mhm.
Do you have resources you guys use?
I mean, it's kind of a broken record, but I would personally first start with my network. I know there are job boards, but personally, I would start with my network.
Okay.
Yeah, I think job boards and RFPs are kind of last resort for me, to be honest. I think it's hard. I mean, it's the lifeblood of your business, but it's also like hard to quantify sometimes. But I think what Chad said is right. You know, you're building your expertise, you're making relationships, you're networking. And, you know, I would say one thing, don't be afraid to ask. I mean, one of my first big breaks was actually at a Drupal meetup. Somebody came in and mentioned a project that they were thinking of doing. And I went up to them and said, hey, that sounds like a project I think I could help you with. And it ended up being, you know, my first big quote unquote break. It was my first big project. And, you know, if I hadn't gone up to the guy and said, hey, I think I can help you with that, and said, were you actually looking for somebody, that probably wouldn't have happened.
So this is like about, so your comments are like proactive, getting involved in the community. Again, a little concerned about hearing that, hey, you need to build relationships, because that is a long-term thing. That's not short-term. So if you're looking for work immediately, are there avenues to do that you recommend?
Yeah, I mean, when I was first starting out, and this is probably going to date me, I would look at just Monster or Craigslist or things like that, and just look for anything that remotely looked like, oh, I can do that, or, you know, I can kind of do that, and I'll learn along the way. But at that level, you have a lot less to lose. You're not being hired as a senior level where, you know, you have 10, 20 years of experience.
Yeah.
You're just cutting your teeth on this stuff. You know, you are starting simply. And I would hope that you kind of budget for that. Nobody jumps straight up to the senior level fresh out of college or fresh into a new industry.
Yeah, LinkedIn's got me a couple projects, but I mean, I'm not the best one to look to for those types of, I tend to avoid things like Upwork.
I've had great success with Indeed, but we're going back probably 3 or 4 years ago, that it was a platform that I got a number of jobs in. It's something it's like part of your routine you need to do every day is you subscribe in Indeed to these criteria that you want, and you respond to them every day. You don't expect that every day is or any day is going to land a deal, but you kind of do it redundantly. And then I think you'd find over a period of time, you could find some decent leads there.
So I have a question. For you guys. In listening to this portion of the show, right? Clearly, you have to be your own sales guy. You have to be filling that sales pipeline. What % of time are you guys spending filling the pipeline versus doing the work? Steven, I'll let you go first.
Yeah, I'm not like, so at this point in my life, I'm not a good example of that. I'm on some long-term work, and I filled my pipeline for a number of years, but over my 24 years, I would say that I would have to spend a day a week when I was actively pursuing projects for me and my team. It was a day a week.
Okay.
Yeah. I mean, for me, in the beginning, it was far more than 50% of the time was spent looking for work. Yeah. I mean, probably 60 or 70%. I was very inefficient. But over the last couple of years, it swung very hard the other way. You know, I do most of my sales work is spent maintaining existing relationships.
So Nick, your sales work is you've reached a level of expertise that people want you to work on their projects, and you do good work. That's where you need to get to as a contractor.
Yeah.
Right?
And that takes time. I mean, for me, it probably took
10 years.
I would say it took 8 to 10 years for me to get to that point.
Chad, what about you?
I think it really depends on the types of work that you're doing. If you're doing more direct stuff, I would actually argue you need more time for sales and marketing. You need to spend, like for me, just getting back into this, I just spend a lot of time brushing up my resume, getting a portfolio put together and rekindling some of those conversations. It took me, I want to say, maybe a few weeks to get to a point where I had my first contract looking good. Took maybe another month to push through the second contract to fill my dance card, so to speak. And I would expect that if I weren't doing agency work, if I were constantly coming back to this and nurturing this, I don't want contracts that are going to last a week. I want contracts that are going to last maybe a few months to a year, because I feel like that's a little bit easier of an investment. But you can't always pick those sort of terms. You can just target those sort of things. So I agree. Like, if you're going to pace it out and make a routine, maybe a few hours a week if you're just keeping up with things. But if you need to actively pursue something, me personally, I would slot off maybe about 2 weeks at least to nurture a new opportunity.
Perfect. So let's move into something that's super important when you're a contractor, right? Your contract, or your contracts, I should say, and your rates, right? Because at the end of the day, those are going to be kind of the guiding factors for you doing your work. So let's start off pretty basic. Why do you need a contract?
You need a contract.
Period.
Because you need a contract. I mean, there's so many, you cannot do work without a contract. I mean, the contract basically just lays out the rules for the relationship, and it guarantees that if you meet your end, you'll get paid. Well, maybe I shouldn't say guarantees, because even with the contract, it can be messy, but you 100% should not do any work whatsoever without a contract ever.
Okay. And then under that guidance, right? Always have a contract. Should you use their contract or should you have your own?
Depends.
Yeah, it depends. My answer is use your contract when possible, obviously, because it's going to protect you more. If you're using their contract, don't be afraid to change it. I mean, you don't, just because you have a giant corporation giving you a contract doesn't mean, and they have 30 lawyers and staff, doesn't mean you can't say, you know what, I'm not signing over all liability to you guys because, it's your project, and that might make negotiations take longer, but, they're used to negotiation. They're not going to change. There's some things that they obviously won't change, but those are for you to find out. Don't be afraid to mark up a contract that you're working on. Make sure that whatever contract you're signing is protecting you and is something that you can meet.
Nick, I think that is like the biggest point on contracts is don't be afraid to ask for what you want, doesn't matter whose contract it is, and don't be afraid to challenge it.
And read it. Read the contract.
So that's exactly what I was. That's exactly what I was going to say. Make sure you read it and you understand it, right?
Yes.
So even if you're using theirs, Nick's absolutely right. You can make suggested changes. The worst thing they can say is no. But make sure you read it. Make sure you understand it, because ultimately, at the end of the day, that's what you're going to be held against while you're doing that project. Let's talk a little bit about the key elements of a contract. So some areas where, you typically see in contracts, right, are SOW, or scope of work, basically outlining what work is going to be done. Terms and conditions, talking about, how the work might be done or in what condition the work has to be. Managing changes to the contract, the legal aspects of it. What jurisdiction are you guys? If you have to go to court, are you guys going to be?
Will there be arbitration?
Going to have to take place.
The arbiter.
So legal aspects, and we'll dive into these a little bit more. But copyright: who owns the work? Is it the person you're working for? Is it you? Payment terms, which is super important. We're going to talk about rate in a minute, but payment terms are definitely important. Non-compete and being aware of your non-compete. I have an NDA in here, which is typically a separate document, but an NDA could be applicable depending on what type of work you're doing. And last but not least, terminating the contract, because if it turns out it's not working out, then, both sides should have the ability to terminate if need be. So let's open this up for a few minutes and just kind of jump into the areas you guys think are important.
I would lead with, before you even look at documentation, before you even talk about rates, just brainstorm on what your personal boundaries are. Understand when you want to work. Understand what your financial situation looks like. Understand, are you going to work with one party or multiple parties? Like, understand what those are before you even glance at at a contract, and then go into looking at that contract with that lens. What compromises are you willing to make versus where are you not going to budge?
Yeah. Yeah. And speaking of that, one of the things that should be in the contract is your point of contact. You want the person who you're responsible for communicating with defined, so that, if you're working with especially when you're working with bigger companies, if some random person from the company starts telling you to do stuff, you want to know whether or not that's something you're expected to do, where that falls. So just having like, such a person is the point of contact. Somebody else tells you to do something, you just forward it to them and say, hey, is this something I need to take care of? If they say yes, yes. If they say no, no. And you want that defined, those channels defined.
It's also another instance where having some sort of legal counsel, and maybe not a lawyer on retainer, because that could be kind of expensive, but having somebody that you can say, hey, can you take a look at this and make sure, like, I have a question about this, or I have, some concerns about this. Can you just look at it? Could be kind of helpful, depending on what types of contracts you're working with.
So there's two things that jump out at me. I've signed many contracts with Fortune 10 companies and small agencies. One is, never be afraid to just ask questions and talk to the person who's giving you the contract. Often you're both trying to get to the same goal, which is to get the work done and sign something that you both agree upon. So talking to someone is always helpful. Second thing is, try to focus on making the contract equal. So an example would be, often I see contracts that say, we can terminate you for anything, for any reason immediately. But by the way, you cannot terminate the contract for these reasons. And I always look in contracts to say, listen, if you can do something in some manner, I can do the same thing. And always looking for the contracts to be fair on both sides. So if they can get rid of me in 30 days with no reason, then I should be able to terminate the contract in 30 days for no reason as well. So you should look at that kind of to try to make the contract fair on both sides.
I would also add to that payment terms. I think payment terms are important. And a lot of times when I was doing contracting, depending on what or who, typically I would try to get a portion of the payment up front and have verbiage in the contract that says, hey, this is up front and may be non-refundable depending on the situation. Because ultimately you want to make sure you're getting part of that, part of that contract if you can. Otherwise, typically a net 30 payment scheme is the norm. We have managing disputes in here. I'm going to quickly go through that. Like, hopefully you don't have disputes, but sometimes you do. Can we 10 seconds from each of you? Any sage advice on managing disputes?
First try to talk to the person, and if you need to escalate on their side, but, I would say don't be afraid to enforce the contract if you need to. It's there to protect both you and them. And if there's a contract dispute and you can't mediate that personally, then don't be afraid to enforce it.
I would also say, though, don't go waving the contract every time that there's a problem.
Yeah, no.
Right? Don't be that
not.
person, because that person ends up not getting another job.
Yeah,
right?
I'll say I've had actual contract disputes that I had to talk to a lawyer twice in 12 years. That it's very, very rare that you would have to do that.
Yeah, I think
you should not have to do that.
if you're getting to the point where you need a lawyer, even if you smell it, then that's definitely the time to talk to them as opposed to waive the contract. But I think this is a good example of why a book like Crucial Conversations exists. Stick to the facts and ask questions. Just work with integrity. If I have a dispute, then I turn it into a question as opposed to an accusation. Are you suggesting that I didn't work these hours? What evidence do you have of that? I take a journal every single day of the things that I'm working on. So I can talk through that with you. We can explore this. Let's try to work this out. I know that we don't want this sort of tension. We want to get to our goal of producing good things and making a profit.
So, and my advice here would be avoid legal action at all costs, because nobody wins, and the only people making money are the lawyers. And I speak from experience.
It also tarnishes your reputation, right? Nobody wants to work with the guy that's suing everybody, right?
Yep. So let's talk briefly about running your business. So we've only got a few minutes here. So there are a few things. We're probably not going to dive into each of these points, but for those listening, you will need something to track your time if you're a freelancer. So you'll need to have something that can track your invoices, send those invoices, mark when they've been paid. A lot of people use QuickBooks. I personally use FreshBooks. A lot of people use Harvest. There's a bunch of different things out there. You need one.
Now, I would mention it shouldn't be the same one that your client uses, because if something should go wrong, you need your own records separate from theirs.
Yes, absolutely.
Good point.
That's a really good point. You should track your expenses as well, both for taxes, but also to make sure you're actually running a profitable business. If your expenses are higher than your revenue, then you're losing money. And if you're not tracking expenses, it can be hard to know.
There's a point here that you're running a business. You're not just programming anymore. So you need to allocate time for that. It takes time every day and every week to run a business. It takes time on a daily basis, on a weekly basis, on a monthly basis, on a quarterly basis. So think about that and allocate time for it.
Also make sure that you do evaluations to, check on how you're doing, make sure still that, your thoughts when you started still match, that it really is for you, check your progress. And make sure that you have dedicated time for actual business tasks like marketing. Make sure that you check in time to time on your time management as well. Because these are all important things that kind of get lost sometimes in the shuffle when you're starting a business.
I love monthly meetings. Do you guys have monthly meetings? Nick, you're a solopreneur kind of. Do you actually dedicate time to yourself for a monthly meeting to sit with yourself and think about the business?
No, but maybe I'll start doing that. I don't do it monthly.
Yeah, it's a super beneficial thing if you haven't done it before. You could have your spouse involved. You could have a partner involved. Take that time, put it in the calendar and say, this is when we're going to talk about what's happened and what over the past month and what we're looking forward to the next month. I think it's like goal setting and just being, taking a different view of what you're doing in your everyday life. I mean, this is a personal thing too, probably, but it's super beneficial if you can do that.
And then the last thing about running a business, because we kind of skipped over this section because we're running out of time, but I do want to say for people starting out, you likely are not charging enough.
For sure.
People that start out always undercharge, almost always. So don't be afraid. It's going to take a while for you to find what your value is, but your first estimate is probably too low. So don't be afraid to experiment a bit with your rate.
Yeah, my CPA recommends withholding 40% for the current scenario, which seems high, especially if you're currently a W-2 sort of employee. But when you account for what it is that you're paying for that originally your employer was deducting, it starts to balance out that, and you're taxed a little bit differently. Yeah. But also when Shelley and I, my wife, sat down to do the numbers for figuring out a rate, we took a look at, okay, how much am I making right now? Now let's completely toss that to the side for the moment and say, okay, if I worked 45 weeks out of the year, it seems like a lot less, but just accounting for deliberately a lower bar, and let's say 30 hours a week, what does that number look like, in dollars per hour? And that really helped us with our rate.
Okay, wasted time here. Where are we?
I think
We're
we're
gonna
at
get
the
3 minutes.
close.
Should we
where
just do
you're-
the?
where
Should we
you're
just do the
supposed to
close?
Ask if we have questions.
Yeah, we're right up against the clock. Let me just make a note here. It's the first edit. 276.
Is that a Pomodoro clock behind you?
That is a time timer. I actually have 2 of them. I use this for exercises. So one I travel with. And yeah, I used to use a Pomodoro, like the little tomato or whatnot, but I use this in like user experience exercises and discovery workshops and things like that, or just meetings. I'll put that on. It's in frame for a reason.
Yep. Yeah. So I think we're just gonna do the outro then, right?
So how about if we do this? We just transition to John asking, we're at the close of the show. Any last things that we've missed that we want to mention? This is for you, Chad, to bring up something that we've kind of glossed over for a couple of minutes, and then we'll do the close.
Okay.
Sound good?
Sounds good.
So this has been a great topic, and I've really enjoyed hearing your insights. Chad, is there anything else that we didn't touch on that you think we should mention?
It's, I think, a longer topic. You could probably even make a show out of it. But the idea of, do you want to be a contractor the whole time? Do you want to be an employee? What would it take to pull you into an employment situation? And I think that's a personal answer, but consider what that is before you're in that kind of like surprise situation where somebody has an offer. Just think about it. Talk to your loved ones and figure out what matters to you.
Perfect.
Hey, if you have questions or feedback, you can reach out to us on Twitter at Talking Drupal. You can reach out to us also on the Drupal Slack at #Talking Drupal. You could also email us at show@talkingdrupal.com.
Thank you to our patrons for supporting Talking Drupal. Your support is greatly appreciated. You can learn more about becoming a patron at talkingdrupal.com and choosing Become a Patron, and you will get a little bit of before and after show.
Awesome. Chad, if folks wanted to hire you, talk to you more about becoming a contractor, or talk to you about mixology, where could they do that?
Sure. I'm on Twitter. Not too much, but that's Chad K. Hester. I'm also LinkedIn, same thing. It's Chad K. Hester. And you can fire me a message there and we'll connect.
Stephen, what about you?
StephenCross.com.
Nick?
You can reach me at Nixman, NICXVAN, pretty much everywhere. How about you, John?
And as usual, I'm John Picozzi. You can find me at John Picozzi on all the major social networks and Drupal.org. If you're interested in Oomph, you can find out about us at oomphinc.com. And as always, if you've enjoyed listening, we've enjoyed talking.